A black woman walks into a police station with quiet confidence, only to face instant suspicion. A white officer, fueled by prejudice and arrogance, steps forward and makes a cruel assumption. One disrespectful moment spirals into a grave mistake. And she only says one line that shifts the air in the room. "We don't serve your kind here." The words slice through the silence like broken glass. Officer Brian Kelton leaned forward over the front desk of the 47th Precinct in Midtown, a smug curl on his lips. His knuckles tapped against the polished countertop in rhythmic judgment, loud enough to turn a few heads, but not enough to register concern. He liked it that way. Subtle, public humiliation. The woman in front of him didn't flinch. She stood tall. A short afro framed her face, silver threads gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. She wore a long navy coat, sleek and clean, with only a leather folder in her hand. Her expression didn't crack. The precinct lobby smelled of old sweat and cheap coffee. A busted vending machine blinked, out of order in the corner, and the only sound aside from Kelton's tapping was the faint buzz of a television showing muted local news. A rookie officer nearby glanced at Kelton, uneasy, but no one moved. The woman's voice, when it came, was soft, but carried more weight than a shout. "I have an appointment." Kelton smirked. "With who?" "You need the public defender's office?" "That's 3 blocks east." Still no reaction. She opened the folder, pulled out a single page, held it up wordlessly. Kelton didn't even look at it. "Ma'am," he mocked, drawing out the word, "unless you're lost, I suggest you turn around. This isn't a shelter." The rookie's discomfort grew visible, a quiet cough, a shift in stance. She placed the folder on the desk with care. Kelton stepped closer. "Don't dump your papers here, you're not—" And then he struck her, a sharp, ugly sound. Open palm, right cheek. The crack echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. A civilian waiting in the corner gasped. Her body turned slightly with the hit, but she didn't fall. She didn't scream. She simply turned her head, back toward him, slow, measured, and met his eyes. Still no emotion. Just stillness, like silence before a storm. A drop of blood ran from her lip. She wiped it with her thumb, and then she spoke. "You just made the last mistake of your career." Kelton's smirk vanished. The rookie's radio crackled faintly. "No." One moved, and then the desk sergeant walked out of the back room, saw her face, and stopped dead in his tracks. "Judge Whitaker," he said, pale as death. The color drained from Sergeant Hall's face so fast it looked like the life had been sucked out of him. He froze mid-step, his mouth ajar, eyes darting between the stunned officer and the woman with the blood-specked lip. "Judge Whitaker," he repeated, quieter this time, almost hoping he was wrong. Officer Kelton blinked. "What did you say?" The woman didn't respond. She didn't need to. Hall stepped forward like he was walking across a minefield. "Ma'am, we weren't expecting—" She held up one hand. The room fell silent again. "I need a supervisor," she said flatly. "Now!" Kelton's voice cracked. "Wait, you're telling me she's a judge?" "Not just a judge, a federal judge. Appointed to the bench by the Justice Department 5 years ago, former civil rights litigator, known across the state for her rulings on police accountability. And now, standing in a precinct, bruised by one of its own, Hall turned toward Kelton, his voice cold and professional. "Officer Kelton, step away from the desk." "What?" Kelton snapped, defensive now. "I didn't know who she was. She didn't say anything. She was just standing there like what?" Judge Whitaker's voice cut through him. He looked at her, and for the first time since this began, he saw her, really saw her. The quiet dignity, the firm presence, the unshakable stillness that felt larger than the room itself. "You assaulted a federal officer of the court," Hall said. "I need your weapon and badge, now." Kelton's mouth hung open. "This is a misunderstanding." "No!" the rookie mumbled, eyes wide. "It's not!" Kelton turned on him. "You saw it!" She didn't even say who she was. I didn't know. You didn't care, the rookie said softly. That's the problem. Whitaker finally moved, stepping around the desk with slow, precise steps. You didn't need to know who I was, she said. You saw my skin. That was enough. Kelton's hands curled into fists, but he didn't speak again. Hall reached out and took his firearm, then his badge. The badge clinked against the desk like a tombstone falling into place. A quiet voice came from the hallway. Internal Affairs is on the line, Hall looked back. Tell them it's urgent. Whitaker turned to the rookie. What's your name, officer? He stood a little straighter. Mason, ma'am, Officer Mason. You saw everything? Yes, ma'am. She nodded. You'll need to write a statement. I will. A heavy silence returned. Hall was on the phone now, voice tight, clipped. Kelton stood off to the side like a child after a tantrum, but the storm had already broken. His world had changed. In a single instant, escort me to a private room, Whitaker said to Officer Mason. Yes, ma'am. He led her down the hall, every step echoing louder than the last. Officers peeked through cracked doors, watching the woman in navy glide past like judgment itself. In a side office, Mason pulled the door open. Please, Your Honor. She stepped inside, sat down slowly, then looked up at him. You did the right thing, she said. He blinked, surprised. I didn't stop him, but you didn't lie. He swallowed, nodding once. She opened her folder again. Inside was a sealed envelope, still untouched. This was supposed to be a simple audit, she said. Anonymous complaint. I came alone, no notice, to test the environment. And now, Mason asked. She closed the folder. Now the entire department will be tested. He said nothing, but the truth of it lingered in the air. Outside, raised voices echoed from the front desk. The story was already spreading like fire through dry brush. One man had thrown a punch. The system had just been hit back. By noon, the 47th precinct didn't feel like a police station anymore. It felt like a crime scene. Internal Affairs arrived in black SUVs, quiet and fast. No sirens, no posturing, just federal agents in suits stepping out, clipboards in hand, faces unreadable. A digital evidence team followed, wheeling in scanners and sealed cases. Every terminal, every camera, every report, everything was about to be dissected. Sergeant Hall met them at the entrance. This way. Where is Judge Whitaker now? The lead agent asked. She's in interview room C. Good. She'll brief us first. Officers stood in clusters as the agents passed. Tension thick in the air. No one spoke. Some looked away, others stared. But one thing was clear. No one knew how deep this went. In the interview room, Judge Whitaker sat with her folder now open wide. Notes in clean cursive, timestamps highlighted. A USB drive waited near her hand. When the lead agent entered, she nodded once. Thank you for the rapid response. He returned the nod. We moved as soon as we got the call. She slid the drive forward. Audio from the lobby, recorded on my personal device. You'll find timestamps, names, facial ID matches. The officer who struck me is named Brian Kelton. The supervisor, Sergeant Hall, responded appropriately. The agent took it without a word. This is no longer about a slap, she continued. This is about the culture that allowed it. He sat across from her. You're seeking a full departmental review? I'm initiating it, she said, effective immediately. Down the hall, Officer Mason sat quietly at a desk, typing his statement. Each word felt heavier than the last. She wasn't threatening. She didn't raise her voice. He just snapped. And then he smiled like it was normal. He paused, then typed again. I froze. I regret not stepping in. At the front desk, Kelton sat in silence, hands cuffed, the same cuffs he had once tightened on others. Now they bit into his wrists. His face was pale. Rage simmered beneath the surface, but it had no place to go. Officers passed by without looking at him. The TV now showed the local news. Breaking. Federal judge assaulted by on-duty officer during surprise visit. Kelton's jaw twitched. He whispered to himself, "This is all wrong. She set me up." But deep down he knew that wasn't true. The only trap here was the one he walked into, forged by his own entitlement, sealed with his arrogance. In the break room, whispers became murmurs. They're going through the files, every report from the last 6 months. Someone said they're pulling body cam footage too. They're even checking misconduct complaints that were closed. One officer, a woman, in plain uniform, leaned against the wall. We knew this was coming. Someone just had to walk in and light the match. And Judge Whittaker had done just that, not with anger, but with presence. By 2 p.m. the precinct was under full review. Officers were not allowed to leave. No phones. No external communication. Computers locked. USB ports disabled. The walls were no longer blue. They were glass. Back in the interview room, the lead agent looked up from the audio file. "We'll begin interviews shortly," he said. "Good," Whittaker replied. "And I'll remain here. I want to see them." "First wave myself. You're not required to stay." She gave a faint smile. "I know." "Then why?" Her voice dropped just slightly. "Because if this department is going to be rebuilt, it should happen with every guilty man looking me in the eyes." The first officer stepped into the interview room like he was walking into a storm. Officer Jensen, white, mid-30s. 2. Encommendations. No prior complaints officially, but Whittaker had seen the unofficial numbers. He sat across from the lead agent, posture stiff. "This isn't a trial," the agent said calmly. "We just want to know what you've seen. What you've experienced." Jensen hesitated. Then he looked at Judge Whittaker, and his jaw clenched. She didn't speak, just watched. He started slow. "Look, Kelton's always been aggressive. Everyone knows it, but no one ever did anything. Complaints would come in, paperwork would vanish. He's protected." "Protected by who?" Jensen shifted. "Hall knew. Everyone up top knew. But Kelton's the kind of guy who gets things handled. Drug busts, street arrests. Numbers looked good on paper. Did you ever file a concern?" He didn't answer, just stared down at his hands. The silence said enough. "Thank you. Officer Jensen, that's all for now." When he left, Whittaker turned toward the agent. "He's afraid. He knows it runs deeper." "They always do," the agent replied. More interviews followed. Each one peeled another layer off the lie. A Latina officer described how Kelton once threw a teen into a wall and laughed when the kid cried. A black officer admitted he was told to stay quiet and blend in after reporting a colleague who used a racial slur during a patrol. One story struck deepest. It came from Officer Monroe. Young, quiet, barely 2 years in. "I saw him plant a weapon once," Monroe whispered. "A switchblade. The guy was clean, just loud. Kelton shoved him down, then said, 'Let's make sure it sticks.' He pulled it from his vest like it was routine. 'Did you say anything?' "I wanted to," Monroe said, "but Sergeant Davis pulled me aside and said, 'You didn't see anything. You want to stay here, right?'" "Who is Sergeant Davis?" "Kelton's friend. They play poker with Chief Rowe on weekends." Whittaker didn't blink. "And Rowe," Monroe looked at the floor. "He promoted Kelton twice." The pattern was becoming a map. Abuse, silence, protection, repeat. Each officer added a name. Each name added a new room to the rot. At 3:40 p.m., Internal Affairs paused for a break. The precinct was dead silent. Judge Whittaker stood in the hallway, looking at the faces of officers who wouldn't meet her gaze. She wasn't angry, not visibly. That's what scared them more, because silence from someone like her wasn't weakness. It was strategy. In the far hallway, Mason approached her with a document in hand. "Ma'am, I think you should see this." It was a list of closed complaints from the last 24 months. Same names, same patterns, same signatures. Many dismissed by one man, Sergeant Davis. Whitaker skimmed the document, then circled two initials. R.K., she said aloud. Raymond Kelton. Mason nodded. His brother works in internal ops. He helped erase records. A slow breath escaped her lips. This isn't a bad apple, she said. This is a poisoned tree. Back in the main office, Kelton sat behind a divider, head down. No cuffs now. Internal Affairs had uncuffed him for paperwork. He stared at nothing. A TV on the wall showed the mayor giving a live press statement. We are aware of the disturbing allegations at the 47th precinct. Let me be clear, no one is above the law, not even those who swear to uphold it. An independent review is underway. Kelton turned away from the screen. They're making me the scapegoat, he muttered to himself. All of them knew they used me, and now they're hiding. But it was too late. The building was bleeding truth. Judge Whitaker returned to the observation room. The next phase was clear now. This wasn't about one punch. It was about every door that stayed closed, every voice silenced, every paper signed and sealed in the dark. The precinct didn't need reform, it needed fire. The street outside the precinct looked like a battlefield of microphones. News vans lined the curbs, cameras sat perched on tripods. Reporters stood under umbrellas in the afternoon drizzle, yelling into lenses. The story had exploded, not just locally but nationally. Federal judge assaulted by police. Sparks department-wide investigation. Midtown precinct under fire. Culture of silence exposed. Inside, the storm had just begun. Judge Whitaker stood near a window, arms folded, watching the commotion outside. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She simply waited. Behind her, the precinct roiled. A young officer, Daniels, slipped a sealed folder into the hands of an internal affairs agent. His voice trembled. These are body cam uploads that never made it into the system. They were rerouted. By who? The agent asked. Daniels hesitated. It's Supervisor Marks. He was told to clean anything that might make the department look bad. Who told him that? Daniels swallowed. Sergeant Davis, sometimes the chief. The agent gave a slow nod and took the folder without a word. Daniels turned away fast, head low, but he had lit his match. Another officer came forward, then another and another. They weren't all heroes. Some were trying to save themselves. Others were just tired. Tired of looking away, tired of feeling small, tired of being complicit in something they never believed in. The building was turning against itself. Kelton sat alone in a secured interview room, sweat beading on his forehead. His hands shook. The walls felt smaller now. No backup, no shield, no smirking partners, only silence, and a distant voice on a radio repeating, "Under federal review, under federal review." Then came the voices from the outside. Community leaders started arriving by late afternoon. Reverend Miles, tall, suited, sharp-eyed, walked through the precinct doors like he owned the floor. Behind him were faith leaders, local organizers, lawyers and families who'd once filed complaints that disappeared into nothing. He didn't ask for permission. He walked straight to Sergeant Hall. "We want the files." Hall stiffened. "Sir, this is a secured. The woman you let get punched in your lobby is a federal judge." Miles snapped. "You think the rules haven't already changed?" Hall didn't reply. Miles leaned closer. "This isn't your house anymore." By 5 p.m. it was chaos. Half the officers were under informal review. Every computer was mirrored. A protest had begun to form outside. Signs, chants, megaphones. Justice for all, not just the badge. Clean house now. She was a judge. What about the rest of us? Inside, Judge Whitaker watched it unfold with the kind of patience that only came from a lifetime of knowing exactly how power worked. She wasn't angry. She was deliberate. Every word, every movement, every silence. When she finally spoke again, it was to the internal affairs lead. Pull every complaint with matching patterns, language, dates, partners involved. Focus on Davis and Rowe, he nodded. We're already on it. And tell your director, she added, I'm not leaving until the last lie falls. Back in the bullpen, Officer Monroe sat next to Mason. This place is gonna burn, Monroe said. Mason looked up from his screen. It already is. They exchanged a look. Two young officers who once kept their heads down now swept into something they didn't fully understand. Something bigger than policy, bigger than command, a reckoning. Suddenly, there was a loud noise at the front. Desk. The precinct doors flung open with a hard bang. Everyone turned. Chief Rowe had arrived. Broad frame, tan trench coat, red face, and not from the cold. He walked in like he still ran the place. The room tensed. Whitaker didn't move. Rowe's voice echoed. I want to speak to the judge. Alone. The agent by the door said nothing. Rowe's eyes found Whitaker's. You want a circus or you want the truth? She stepped forward, calm and steady. No more rooms behind closed doors, she said. If you have something to say it here. He stared at her. She didn't blink. He opened his mouth, but he never got the chance to speak because at that moment, the door behind him opened and 4 federal agents walked in. One of them held a warrant. For obstruction of justice, the lead agent said. Chief Raymond Rowe, you're under arrest. Gasps filled the precinct. And Judge Whitaker, she didn't even raise an eyebrow. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was here. Click. The handcuffs clamped around Chief Rowe's thick wrists like the jaws of truth finally snapping shut. He didn't resist, but his eyes, red and swollen, scanned the room with disbelief, as if loyalty was supposed to shield him from consequences. It didn't. Federal agents flanked him, one on each side. His badge, gleaming and heavy, was pulled from his coat pocket and dropped into an evidence bag. It thudded like an anchor. Cameras outside flashed as he was walked to the black SUV, head lowered, trench coat flapping behind him like a fallen banner. Inside the precinct, the silence was deafening. Officers stood frozen, some in shock, others in relief. A few, the ones who'd suffered quietly for years, felt a strange, almost dangerous thing rising in their chests. Hope. Judge Whitaker remained still in the hallway. Arms folded, face unreadable. Sergeant Hall approached slowly. Ma'am, permission to speak freely, she turned. Go ahead. I didn't stop him, he said quietly. Kelton, or Davis, or Rowe. I looked the other way. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Was it? His voice cracked. It was always my problem. I just didn't want to risk being next. There was no pity in her eyes, but there was clarity. The badge isn't armor, she said. It's accountability. You wore it like a weapon. Hall lowered his eyes. Behind them, internal affairs agents buzzed like hornets through every office, every file cabinet, every terminal. The walls of silence were crumbling, brick by dirty brick. One door after another burst open. In the evidence locker, they found sealed reports that had never been logged. In the surveillance room, they discovered manipulated footage timelines, clips shortened to hide abuse. And in Davis's desk drawer, a hard drive encrypted, labeled for internal use only. It didn't stay internal for long. By 6:15 p.m., a command-wide bulletin went out. All precinct staff to report for emergency ethics review. Mandatory attendance. Immediate effect. Then, the voice came over the precinct speaker system. Calm, clear, and firm. Judge Whitaker, if you are listening to this, then you've already heard what happened today. But this is not just about what happened to me. It's about what's been happening in this building for years. To people without badges, without cameras, without voices. Her voice echoed through the corridors like judgment. This is not a witch hunt. It's a reckoning. The shield you wear was never meant to protect corruption. It was meant to protect people. Somewhere along the way, too many of you forgot that. Some officers stopped what they were doing, frozen in place. You are not all guilty, but you are all responsible. What you do next How you respond now, and will define your future in this city, in this uniform, and in this nation. And then came the line that would be quoted on every news channel for days. If the badge became a weapon in your hands, you're no longer fit to hold it. Click. Silence. Officer Monroe turned slowly from his desk. She didn't yell. Mason beside him nodded. Didn't have to. Out front, the protest had doubled. Chants echoed down the streets. Media vans rolled live coverage. Social media feeds flooded with clips from inside the building. A clip of Whitaker's speech, barely 20 minutes old, had already hit 3 million views. Inside, officers began removing their name tags voluntarily. Not in shame, but to offer statements, to admit truths, to break the cycle. A female officer in her 50s, long ignored, brought a file from 2008. Kelton should have been fired years ago. He beat a suspect unconscious. The footage was buried. A nervous patrolman handed in a flash drive. Body cam from 3 weeks ago. I was told to delete it. I didn't. One by one they stepped forward. Not all, but enough to matter. And all the while, Whitaker stayed in the precinct, watching, listening. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was the measuring stick, the mirror, the reminder. By 8 p.m., Internal Affairs had enough material to launch a full-scale inquiry into 2 decades of misconduct. The Department of Justice confirmed it was opening a formal investigation into systemic abuse at the 47th. Kelton still sat alone. No one spoke to him now. Not even the ones who once laughed at his jokes, covered his mess, drank with him after shifts. He stared at the floor, sweating, eyes twitching. "They're gonna hang me out to dry," he muttered. Every single one of them. And he was right, because when the truth starts burning, it doesn't stop with the match. It consumes the hands that held it. In the sub-basement of the precinct, dust hung in the air like secrets. 2 agents opened. A forgotten file cabinet, one rusted drawer at a time. Inside, manila folders, dozens, stamped with old dates, faded signatures, and one word on almost every tab: unsubstantiated. But the stories inside told otherwise. There were pictures, bruises, broken teeth, fingerprints too dark to be mistakes. There were statements, handwritten, desperate, ignored, and there were names that matched the same handful of officers. Again and again, Kelton, Davis, Martinez, Rowe. One file dated 6 years ago told of a young black man, 23, detained during a traffic stop. No drugs, no weapon. He was pulled from the car and hospitalized within the hour. The case was dropped. His complaint vanished. The final note on the back of the report said, "Problematic but closed by Rowe." Upstairs, Judge Whitaker stood at a terminal surrounded by agents. The files were being digitized one by one. Every click revealed another failure. "These were never entered into the main system," one tech said. "They were processed and shelved before being scanned." On whose orders? "Looks like Davis signed off on most of them." Whitaker's voice was ice. "I want contact information for every civilian listed as a complainant. Start calling them, personally." The agent paused. "It's late, Your Honor." She didn't blink. So was justice. At 9:32 p.m., a woman arrived at the precinct. She wasn't loud. She didn't carry a sign. Her name was Mrs. Valerie Kearns. She was 62, wore a green scarf, carried an envelope in her hand. She walked through the doors with quiet purpose. Her heels echoed on the tile. She stopped at the front desk and said 4 words. "I heard the news." Sergeant Hall approached, startled. "Ma'am, are you here to file a—" "I already did," she said. 6 years ago." Hall froze. She opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of the complaint she'd made back then. Subject, Brandon Kearns. Incident, excessive force. Officer involved, B. Kelton. She laid it on the desk. My son got pulled over for a busted tail light, she said. They beat him so bad his jaw had to be wired shut. Said he resisted. There were no charges. They let him walk. But the next day, he couldn't talk. No one interrupted. I filed this right here in this building, she continued. Kelton laughed at me when I brought it in, said my boy should have known better. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. Not loud, not dramatic. Just raw. They told me it was closed, unsubstantiated. Said Brandon must have hit himself in the car door. She looked at Hall, and something in his face broke. Do you know what it feels like to tell your son that justice doesn't have room for him? He shook his head slowly. Of course you don't. She turned her eyes to the hallway, where Judge Whittaker now stood. They locked eyes, and Whittaker approached like gravity itself had shifted. Mrs. Kearns, she said, I have your file. The woman's chin trembled. Is it real this time? She whispered. Whittaker's voice didn't rise, but it filled the room. It is now. The precinct was silent again, but the silence wasn't empty. It was charged. The agent scanned the rest of the cabinet. 43 more files, 43 stories. Each one had a name. Each one had a voice buried beneath ink and lies. At 10:04 p.m., Internal Affairs issued a public statement. We have uncovered evidence of long-term suppression of civilian complaints at the 47th Precinct. A federal task force will begin interviews with past victims. All officers involved in the concealment of misconduct will face investigation and potential prosecution. Outside, candles began appearing on the steps of the precinct, one by one, held by strangers, survivors, families who thought their stories were lost. Inside, officers watched quietly through the glass. Some wept, some turned away, and some stood. Taller, finally understanding what their silence had cost. Whittaker turned to the agents beside her. We're not just reviewing a department, she said. We're unburying the truth. And beneath every lie, someone had waited. 10 days later, Federal Courthouse, downtown. The courtroom buzzed with electric tension, wooden pews packed with press, officials and families. Outside, protesters held signs high in the wind. No more shields for racism. We believe Valerie. Clean every precinct. Inside, a federal seal hung heavy on the wall, and in the center of it all, Judge Arlene Whittaker. No longer just a target. Now, she was the blade. The hearing was public. Cameras were allowed. Transparency was the rule. The Department of Justice had issued multiple subpoenas. 7 officers, 2 administrators, 1 former chief, and first to the stand, Brian Kelton. He walked in shackled at the wrists and ankles, suit wrinkled, eyes hollow. A shadow of the man who once smirked behind a precinct desk. He swore the oath with a trembling hand. The prosecutor stepped forward. Mr. Kelton, do you recall the morning of March 8th in the 47th Precinct lobby? Kelton shifted in the seat. Yes. Did you physically assault a woman that morning? I didn't know who she was. That wasn't the question. He looked up, defensive. Yes, I did. I slapped her. And do you now understand the legal weight of striking a federal judge? Kelton's jaw clenched. I didn't know she was... No one asked what you knew. We're asking what you did. Silence. The prosecutor turned. Let's move to pattern, Your Honor. Judge Whittaker nodded. Proceed. The prosecutor clicked a remote. A screen lit up with complaint files. Exhibit 14A through 32C, she said. These are 19 verified excessive force complaints filed against Mr. Kelton over 8 years. Most were closed as unsubstantiated. Until now. Kelton shifted in his seat. His lawyer leaned in, whispered fast. He didn't look up. The screen changed. A photo appeared. A teenage boy. Split lip. Swollen face. Dark eyes full of pain. Brandon Kearns, the prosecutor said, beaten by Officer Kelton during a routine traffic stop. Never charged. File buried. Gasps from the gallery. Next slide. A woman in a green scarf. The prosecutor paused. Valerie. Kearns, would you please approach? Mrs. Kearns rose slowly, hands shaking but spine straight. She took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She looked Kelton in the eyes and said, "My son couldn't speak for 3 weeks, but I've had 6 years to find the words for him." Whitaker watched. Steady. Focused. Mrs. Kearns continued, "You looked me in the face and told me my son hurt himself. You lied, and everyone behind you let that lie live." She turned to the jury. "I buried my boy last year, not from the beating, from the silence after. He never trusted police again. He never trusted people again." Kelton looked away. "You may have bruised him," she said, "but the system broke him." When she stepped down, the courtroom didn't applaud. They didn't need to. The silence spoke louder. Next, Officer Daniels, then Monroe. Each one took the stand, piece by piece unraveling the web. Stories of erased footage, falsified reports, intimidation from superiors. The gallery leaned forward, listening like the fate of something bigger than the precinct hung in the air, because it did. By noon, live feeds of the trial topped national headlines. Hashtags trended. Civil rights lawyers began filing matching inquiries into other precincts. The ripple had become a wave. In a recess, Whitaker sat alone in chambers. An assistant entered. "You were right. DOJ just announced federal reviews in 5 other states." She nodded. "Good." He hesitated. "Ma'am, they're saying you've started a national reckoning." Whitaker closed her eyes for one long breath, then opened them. "I didn't start it," she said. "I just refused to walk past it." Back in the courtroom, Kelton's lawyer stood. "Up, Your Honor, we request leniency based on my client's state of mind and the lack of clear departmental standards." Whitaker cut him off. "You're not here for excuses, Counselor. You're here for answers." He sat down, and with that she issued the next order. All officers named in sealed complaints are to be brought forward over the next 48 hours. No delays, no exceptions. No one dared to object, because the room no longer belonged to the blue wall. It belonged to the truth. The morning air around the courthouse was thick with flashbulbs and fury. Police unions issued panicked press releases. Mayors made vague promises of cooperation. Governors gave interviews about isolated failures, but no one could deny the truth anymore, not after that testimony. Valerie Kearns, Monroe, Daniels, even Hall. Each had helped peel back the curtain, but what came next? That shattered the whole stage. It started with a knock. Judge Whitaker was mid-break in her chambers, sipping black coffee, hands steady. A clerk leaned in. "Your Honor, we have a surprise witness. He's requested to testify anonymously, under protection." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "He says the corruption goes past the department." Her fingers paused around the cup. 10 minutes later, the witness took the stand. Voice modulated, face pixelated behind a privacy screen. "State your position," the prosecutor asked. "I was a senior IT contractor for the city's internal data system," the man said. "I was hired to build software that tracked complaints and officer infractions. And what happened to that data? It was filtered." The room stilled. He continued. "Certain names triggered a redirection protocol. Complaints never reached the public dashboard. They were rerouted to a hidden folder, reviewed only by a private oversight group that reported directly to city officials." "Which officials?" The witness hesitated, then said the name. "Deputy Mayor Hastings." Gasps broke out. 2 reporters rushed out to break the news. "Are you saying the city's top officials were directly involved in suppressing police misconduct reports?" "Yes," the witness replied. "It wasn't just about the precinct, it was policy." Judge Whitaker's gavel struck once, loud and final. "Silence," she said, but her eyes were lit with something electric. Not rage, not triumph, reckoning. Outside, the protest doubled in size within the hour. Not just one precinct. Indict the whole machine. Hastings knew. The governor issued a statement by 11 a.m., attempting damage control. "We were not aware of these actions and will fully support a third-party investigation. But the people weren't buying it. Inside the courtroom, the judge reconvened. "We will expand the inquiry beyond the 47th, she said. "Any entity found to have obstructed justice or aided in the silencing of victims will be summoned back." At City Hall, chaos erupted. Hastings denied involvement, but leaked emails hit the press within hours. "Suppress anything inflammatory. We don't need another Brandon incident." That line sealed his fate. By sundown, a citywide task force was announced. 4 other precincts flagged for immediate review. Internal affairs offices in 2 districts were raided, and in the center of it all, Whitaker, unmoved. Her chambers became command central. Her name, once whispered with disrespect behind closed doors, now echoed like a drumbeat for change. Not everyone liked it. She received threats, emails, voicemails. One even slipped under her windshield. "You embarrassed the badge. Now watch. You're back." She didn't flinch. She gave it to the marshals and went back to court. By day's end, 5 more officers had confessed to cover-ups. 2 lawyers resigned. A former chief in another borough issued a public apology, then disappeared from the public eye, and through it all, Whitaker stayed sharp, focused, patient. Because this wasn't about headlines. It was about finish lines. Lines that had never been crossed, until now. That evening, she held a press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by victims, families, and officers who had finally stepped forward. She didn't read from a paper. She didn't use a podium. She just looked into the cameras and said, "This was never about revenge. This was about the truth. And now that it's out, we're not putting it back in the dark." She paused, letting the words hit. "Anyone still hiding behind a badge or a desk or a donor, hear me out loud. No one is untouchable anymore." Mic drop. Lights flashed, the system shook, and the people, they didn't go home. They stayed. They lit candles. They chanted. No more silence. "We see you. We believe you." Justice was no longer a rumor. It was standing in front of them. The courthouse didn't feel like a building anymore. It felt like a broadcast tower. And Judge Whitaker's voice was reaching the country. Every hearing, every witness, every revelation, live-streamed, quoted, dismantled, shared. The people were no longer just watching. They were documenting history in real time. Outside, protest lines had become camps. Volunteers set up tents, banners, and meals. Donated supplies arrived daily. Activists flew in from out of state. They weren't going anywhere, because this wasn't about one judge anymore. This was about every mother who'd been ignored. Every son was brutalized and erased. Every closed case that never got heard, and at the center of it all, Whitaker. But inside the courtroom, the climax hadn't hit yet. That came with the final witness. Her name wasn't on any file. No complaints, no incident report. She was the missing piece, a retired dispatcher, Ms. Lenora Ellis. She requested to testify voluntarily. No lawyer, no warning, just conviction. She walked into the courtroom with a cane and a quiet fire in her eyes. "I worked in the 47th precinct for 31 years, she began. "I saw it all, heard it all, and I recorded every single thing that passed through that radio system." Gasps echoed. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Ms. Ellis, are you saying you retained audio logs?" "I am," she nodded. "Because I knew one day someone like her would come." She pointed straight at Judge Whitaker, someone who wouldn't flinch. The room leaned in as she continued. "I archived everything, even the deleted calls, the altered ones, the ones marked as malfunctioned, but were really just too damning to keep." A USB drive was handed over. Inside, hundreds of hours of uncensored audio, and on the first clip played, everyone in the room froze. It was Kelton's voice, from 5 years ago, laughing after a takedown. "Don't worry, Davis'll clean it up. He always does." A second clip, a third, a fourth. It was a pattern, not of corruption, of coordination, internal cover-ups, false reports, discarded footage, all caught in voices that never expected to be replayed. Whitaker sat motionless, but inside she knew this was it. This was the hammer. By the time Ellis left the stand, she received a standing ovation. Not from the press, not from the lawyers, from the families, from the officers who'd stayed quiet too long. That afternoon, Whitaker addressed the courtroom before adjournment. She didn't use legalese. She didn't read from prepared remarks. She spoke like a woman with fire in her lungs and 1,000 stories behind her ribs. "I was hit once in a precinct lobby," she began. "But that wasn't the wound. The real injury was everything that came before. Every closed door, every vanished file, every mother ignored me." She paused, letting it settle. This court was never about just me. It was about the people who never got their day in front of a judge, who never made it home, who were told they were the problem. Flashbulbs went off, cameras rolled. But to every soul who's been told to sit down, shut up and wait their turn, I'm here to say, your turn is now. She looked straight at Kelton, and for those who built careers on silence, fear and abuse, this is your last chapter. Then she turned to the court, and I promise you this, when they tried to silence me, they didn't stop a judge. She leaned forward, voice firm and electric. They created a voice for thousands. That line went viral. That clip was replayed by every network. The quote was painted across murals, printed on protest banners, tattooed onto forearms. They tried to silence her. Now she speaks for thousands. By nightfall, 3 states launched formal reviews. 2 governors held emergency press conferences, and the city, the one that once buried the truth, finally bowed to it. April 7th, 8:59 a.m. Federal Courthouse. The building held its breath. Hallways were lined with quiet stares. Courtroom benches filled hours before the session began. The media had been locked out. No cameras this time, only transcripts. The people already knew what this day meant. This wasn't just a verdict, it was a mirror. At the front of the courtroom sat the accused, Brian Kelton, pale, chin down. Sergeant Davis, stiff, bitter, arms crossed, former chief. Rowe, handcuffed, sweating through his collar. Deputy Mayor Hastings, stone-faced, jaw set, and in the gallery behind the velvet barrier, the families. Dozens. Silent. Shoulders touching. Hands gripped. They weren't here for punishment. They were here for recognition. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doors opened. Judge Whitaker entered, robed, calm, unblinking. No theatrics. No theatrics were needed. She took her seat and adjusted the microphone. "We are here today not simply to deliver judgment," she began, "but to acknowledge what has long gone unacknowledged. That silence, when worn like a badge, becomes violence." No one stirred. Over the course of this trial, evidence has been presented of widespread corruption, coordinated concealment, and repeated violations of public trust. The facts are no longer in dispute. She paused. Her voice was steady, measured, surgical. This court finds the following. The room leaned forward. Brian Kelton, guilty of assaulting a federal officer, falsifying reports, and violating the civil rights of multiple citizens under color of law. He closed his eyes. His lawyer placed a hand on his back, but he didn't react. Sergeant Thomas Davis, guilty of evidence suppression, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to cover up departmental abuse. A sharp gasp from a young officer in the gallery. Former Chief Raymond Rowe, guilty of aiding in suppression, criminal negligence, and willful failure to report misconduct at the highest level. Rowe turned red, then white, and finally, Deputy Mayor James Hastings, guilty of abuse of office, data tampering, and obstruction of federal investigations. The silence cracked, tears fell, breaths hitched, and Judge Whitaker continued, "But let us be clear, this ruling is not the end, It is the beginning of an obligation, the beginning of accountability. These convictions do not erase the past. They acknowledge it. Then she leaned forward, eyes scanning the room. To the victims who stood tall, to the families who carried grief in silence, to the officers who finally told the truth, you are not side notes in this courtroom, you are the reason it stands. And then, softly, almost like a final note, this court recommends a full federal oversight of the 47th Precinct, immediate structural reform, and the establishment of an independent citizen review board. Permanently, the clerk began, reading sentencing recommendations. Kelton, 17 years, Davis, 12 years, Rowe, 8 years, Hastings, 6 years, plus a federal ethics ban. The gavel struck. Court adjourned. It was done. But no one moved, not at first, because the weight of it was still falling, like dust after an explosion. Then came the sound, not applause, not cheers, just quiet crying. Mrs. Valerie Kearns, in the second row, stood slowly and placed her hand on the empty seat beside her. She whispered something no one else heard, but Whitaker did. And for the first time in weeks, her hands trembled. Outside, the city had changed. The protest signs were still there, but they were joined by thank you banners, memorial photos, and a mural in progress on the courthouse wall, a painting of a black woman in navy blue, standing alone. Unshaken, and underneath in bold black letters, "Truth doesn't fear uniforms." Reporters shouted for quotes, officials dodged microphones, but the people, they stayed. Whitaker exited through the main doors, not the back. No security escort, just presence. A child held a cardboard sign that read, "I want to be a judge like her." She stopped, kneeling briefly. "You can," she said, "but be better than me. Start earlier." That moment, captured by a photographer across the street, would become the image on the front page of Time, New York Times, and the Smithsonian Civil Rights Archive. Later that night, Whitaker didn't celebrate. She sat alone in her apartment, TV off, phone silent, case files closed, just her and a single piece of paper on the table, a letter, handwritten, from a mother in Georgia. "You don't know me, but I watched every minute. My son was killed in 2002. They called it justified. I know it wasn't. But after seeing you, I finally believe the truth matters again." Whitaker read it twice, then folded it gently and slid it into a drawer labeled, "Never Forget Why." 3 months later. A summer sun rose gently over the city that once held its breath in fear. But now it exhaled. Gone were the barricades. Gone were the nightly marches. What remained were memorial murals and beginnings. Outside the former 47th Precinct building, the marble had been stripped from the walls. The building had a new name now, the People's Justice Center, part museum, part legal aid clinic, part public transparency hub. On its front steps, carved into the concrete, "In memory of the unheard, in service of those who speak." Inside, beneath glass, sat the gavel Judge Whitaker used to deliver the verdicts that cracked a system wide open. Next to it, the blood-stained copy of Valerie Kearns' original complaint, now framed in gold. Tour groups came daily, school buses. It pulled in, filled with children clutching notebooks, sketching the murals that wrapped around the walls. Mosaics of faces, bruised, unbowed, beautiful. The 47th was no longer a stain, it was a lesson. Across the country, change pulsed outward. The Whitaker Acts, sweeping legislation born from the trial, passed in 5 states. Mandatory, federal-level review of all complaints involving use of force. Lifetime bans for officers found guilty of racialized misconduct. Citizen oversight boards with subpoena power. Body cam footage stored on third-party cloud servers, untouchable by internal staff. Independent whistleblower protection for officers reporting abuse. For the first time in U.S. history, police reform wasn't just debated, It was enforced. The Department of Justice created a new division, the Office for Institutional Integrity, and the first person they asked to consult, Judge Arlene Whitaker, but she declined because she had already chosen her path. Instead of titles, she chose testimony. Instead of courtrooms, she chose classrooms. 1 month after the verdict, she appeared unannounced in a small town outside Birmingham, Alabama, in a high school gym that held more heat than chairs. No cameras, no microphones. Just 60 students. A girl in the back wearing her brother's oversized hoodie raised her hand. "Weren't you scared?" she asked. "Yes," Whitaker answered. "But fear and silence are not the same." The girl blinked. "Did you ever want to quit?" "Every day," she said, "right up until I remembered whose name I was carrying." The gym was silent. Every file I uncovered, every lie we unburied, had someone's name on it. A son, a daughter, a brother, a mother. If I stopped, they stayed erased. The silence turned to steel. That night, someone wrote her quote in chalk outside the school. "If I stopped, they stayed erased." It was shared 2.1 million times in under a week. Whitaker didn't have social media, but her words traveled like wildfire. Back in the city, Valerie Kearns visited the Justice Center every Sunday. She never spoke to crowds, never gave speeches, but she'd walk up the marble steps with a photo of Brandon in her purse. Sometimes she'd sit by the fountain. Sometimes she'd talk to students on field trips. One little girl once asked, "Did your son die in that building?" Valerie knelt. Her voice trembled, but not from sorrow. "No, baby, he was erased in it, but he's alive again now, in every one of you." In late September, Whitaker was invited to address Congress. The room was packed. Live broadcast. A channel. She wore grey, no jewelry. Her hair pulled back like always, regal in its simplicity. "This country has never lacked good laws," she began. "It has lacked accountability. And accountability doesn't come from fear. It comes from courage. From people willing to say, 'This is broken, and I won't walk past it again.'" Her words didn't shout. They landed. Heavy, solid, earned. "Justice isn't perfect," she continued, "but justice is possible. If we protect it. If we protect the truth." When she stepped down, several representatives stood, not out of politics, out of reverence, and still she returned home. Alone, no security, no entourage, just a small apartment with yellow curtains and the soft hum of a desk lamp. A drawer beside her bed overflowed with letters, some handwritten, some typed, some only a sentence long. She read one every night, but the one taped above her desk never changed. The one she never removed. "You didn't just win, you changed everything." She never found out who wrote it, but she kept it because it was true. She didn't want statues or ceremonies or fame. What she wanted and what she got was change. Real, brutal, beautiful change. A new generation of officers now wore a different motto on their chest: protect, serve, speak. Law schools taught her case in first semester. High school debate teams quoted her lines. Poets wrote about her hands. Mothers wrote about her eyes. And kids, they dressed as her on Hero Day. One afternoon, while walking through a Brooklyn park, she saw a small boy in a navy blazer holding a toy gavel. He looked up, then froze. "Are you Judge Whitaker?" She smiled gently. "Sometimes." He hesitated, then handed her the gavel. "I want you to win again." She knelt down, pressed the gavel back into his tiny hands. "You win now," she whispered. "And you make sure no one forgets what it took." In history books, her story ends with a trial. But in real life, it began with a slap and ended with a revolution in silence, a revolution in presence, a revolution in truth. Because they tried to silence her. They mocked her, assaulted her, dismissed her, and now she speaks for generations.